Hey everyone, Chelsea here from So Simple Home. Today we are making Harry Potter robes. This is an example. This is a robe that I made probably 5 years ago for my oldest son. My younger kids still use it. It has an opening in the front, a little button loop, and the hood. And then I found this embroidery file that I put on for him. It's a great little robe, but my younger two kids are really excited. We're going to Harry Potter World this fall, and they want their own robes. So I'm going to show you how to make your own Harry Potter robes. So to start out with, we're just going to move this guy out of the way. What you're going to need is 2 layers of your black material. So this is going to be the exterior of the robe. It is folded in half. You can see that. Folded in half. This is, let me measure it for you right now. This is 45 inches. So just over, so what was that? About a yard and a half, and then we fold that. So I would say about 3 yards of material for one robe. Now, to make this work, you're actually going to just cut one robe on the fold. So the fold should be up here at the top. And then you're going to need either a model. So if you have your kid that's going to have a Harry Potter robe, they can lay down. If you don't have your model on hand, which a lot of times people don't, just get a t-shirt, a long sleeve t-shirt in the size that that child wears. And you're going to put it all the way up to the top where the fold is. And then you're going to kind of spread those arms out, kind of like this, just so that you can get kind of a measurement for what that kid would wear. And then a long pair of pants that you would put about it where you think their waist would go, and then down to the bottom. So we're going to pretend this is a person. Okay, that's the best way to do it. Have your own little model here. Okay, now that we have our model, we're going to get a piece of chalk. You can get a fabric pen as well. And we're just going to kind of outline what we think the robe, the outline of the robe would be. Now, something to remember, you want this robe to fit over clothing. So you actually want to give a lot of leeway. So if we fit, we'll put this robe over the top here. So if we put this robe over the top here, as our example, like I said, this one's just a little bit too small for my kids to be comfortable in. But we're giving it a lot, we're giving it a nice A-frame. We're going to tuck this hood in because we're going to use that later. So you can kind of see, we want the A-frame and we want a lot of space. So where I made my chalk line, it probably isn't quite right, but I'm just using this top. It's going to go straight across the top. And then from about where the armpit, just outside the armpit here, across. Okay, that's kind of what we want. And we want a nice flare at the bottom. So we're going to go out just a little bit farther. I would go on the safe side and go too far, then not far enough. So we're going to come out maybe to like right here. And yes, I am using a piece of sidewalk chalk because I couldn't find my regular chalk. And don't worry if you feel like it's a little big, that's okay. It can be big, right? You can always bring it down just a little bit if you want. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Now we're going to cheat a little bit. And we're going to fold this in half with our chalk line on it. And we're going to see if we can't transfer that chalk line over here a little. And you can kind of see it on this side. You see it here? It's kind of faint. But I'm just gonna fill it in. And now it's symmetrical. It's kind of cheating, isn't it? But that's what our robe is gonna look like. And you're gonna go ahead and cut through all the layers. I'm just gonna cut right in the middle of this giant chalk line. If you do use sidewalk chalk, it doesn't come off quite as well because it usually has a little bit of wax in it. So I would probably just put this part of the robe on the inside. Now save these side pieces. This is what we're going to use to make our hood here in just a little bit. Come on this side. Do the same thing. Come up the chalk line. And save this side again for the hood. Okay, there you go. There is your robe. So here is the front of the robe, or the top layer of the robe. Now we know the inside of the robes are the color of the different houses. And both of my kids for Halloween are going to be Hermione and Harry. And so they both wanted to be Gryffindor on the inside. I really tried to convince my youngest to put Hufflepuff on the inside because he's a Hufflepuff and I'm a Hufflepuff. But he didn't want that because he was going to go as Harry. So, all right. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our top layer. And we're going to do the same thing that we did with our top layer, with our bottom layer. So, or our lining layer. There's our lining. So now we're just going to take the pattern that we made for our outside and line it up on our material here. All right, just like we did our main fabric, and it's just our template, so we don't have to do it twice or pretend like we know what we're doing. And again, we're going to save these little side pieces here so that we can make our hood, because there'll be plenty there to make our hood. Again, there's a fold at the top. This is folded, the material's folded. That's what we want. And then we're just cutting out the side panels, basically, to get rid of them. Now, if you were gonna do an adult size, and the width of the material, like right here, we're going from selvage to selvage. What I would end up doing is just cutting out a few extra rectangles that would add width or length, I guess, to the robe. So my arm is going to be longer, right? So I'd add whatever extra inches here on either side for the top layer and the lining layer. And now we're going to cut out the hoods. The next thing that we're going to do is make the hood. Now, when we're talking about a hood on a robe, we want a larger hood. We don't want a regular hood that barely fits over our head. So the first thing we're going to do is find a sweatshirt or jacket that has a hood on it in the size of the child. You can also go up a size, that's fine as well, because we're going to make this hood big. So what we're going to do is find the middle of the hood and flatten it out so we can kind of see the shape of the hood here. Now, again, we want this hood to be large because it's going to fit over clothing and over a kid's head. And those hoods in Harry Potter are big and billowy. And that's one of the things I love about the robes. So we're going to just use this hood as a template. So we place it on here. We know we want it bigger. So I'm actually going to add at least an inch to this hood, if not a little bit more. I'm just following the outline and the shape of that hood. This is where the seam is. So that's about where we're going to be. I'm going to go maybe an inch lower, and we're going to end about an inch lower over here as well. And so we're going to bring that hood about like that. And you can kind of see it's at an angle. That's fine. That's what we want. So we're going to compare this hood to the one that I already made, just to see how we did. And that seems about right. Okay, so you should be able to do a pretty similar hood shape and size for any size, whether you're doing kids or adults. And then I'm just gonna take the Lazy Girl way, and we're gonna line up our maroon material and put those layers together. Make sure everybody's lined up, at least the best we can do. And then I'm going to cut. We're going to get all the sections here together. Now you do want to remember your seam, that you're going to have a seam allowance. And so I'm cutting on the outside of the chalk line that I made, just to give myself a little bit more leeway here on my hood. There we go. So there's my hood, and there is my lining. Now we're ready to sew. We are ready to get sewing. We are going to start by stitching up the hoods. So we have our 2 hood pieces here, 2 black and 2 red or maroon. We're going to stitch around the curved edge of the hood to start with. So we're just going to put this guy in our machine at about 3/8 of an inch. Oops, I'm going to zigzag still. Forward and back stitch. Make sure you back stitch on the hoods because they are going to get a lot of use. And I'm using about a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're just going to chain stitch the maroon side in. Are ready. Okay, take our iron to it. That just presses those seams right into the material. Helps keep things in place just a little bit better. All right. Now we're going to take and turn our maroon side of the hood right side out, and we're going to tuck it inside the black side of the hood. And we're going to match these 2 seams in the center. Just pin it, and then we're going to match all the way down. You can pin if you want, you don't have to necessarily. And then match all the way down this way as well. And then I'm actually going to start in the middle and stitch from the middle down, and then come back and switch from this side to this side. That just ensures that if for some reason the material moves, I'm still getting a nice smooth edge. And I'm going to stitch this at about 1/4 of an inch. You can move your material as you go. So that's one side. And we're going to do the opposite side. Making sure everything lines up as we go, because sometimes it definitely moves. Right, there's the other side. Clip my threads. That's kind of what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and press those stitches. And pressing is also a good time to check and make sure everything stitched right, like it didn't go off the edge or whatever. So if you have to fix it. Okay, now we're turning it right side out. We're going to turn it out, and then we're going to push the maroon into the black side. Make sure everything tucks in there good. And then again, this is a good time to press. If you want, you can top stitch your hood. I'm not going to. I'm just going to press it really well. The top stitching makes it a little bit stiffer. And I actually just kind of like the soft flow without the top stitching. I think the robe just flows a little bit better without it. Again, it's totally your preference. If you want a top stitch, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. But I think on this particular project that the pressing is all that you really need to do for it. Okay. Looks good. I'm going to just press a little bit of the material here. Get some of those creases out. Okay, that looks good. That looks just like a hood. Okay, and it does kind of have this V, but that's going to come in handy here in just a little bit. So the next thing we're going to do is actually stitch up our robe. So I kind of moved my machine so you can see here. Hopefully you're able to see. We are going to stitch, so this is the top where it's folded. You can kind of see sleeve, or 2 sleeves, right? We are going to stitch from the end of the sleeve to this corner and all the way down to the end. And then we're going to repeat that on the opposite side. So it looks a little weird right now, but I promise in the end it will all work and you'll love it. So I'm just starting on the end where my hand would come out, the end of the sleeve, comes up to the arm, right into that arm's eye or in the armpit, turn, make sure my fabric's lined up, and keep stitching all the way down. Now I'm going to do the other sleeve on the opposite side here. I'm just going to chain stitch it. So here's my sleeve. I'm just going to sleeve it, back stitch, and keep going. And you can kind of see here. Stitched all the way down. and then we did it on the opposite side. Stitch all the way down. So now we're going to repeat that with our maroon layer. All right, now before we do the next step, one thing I want you to do is take your scissors. Here's your arm and here's your side. You're going to clip into that armpit. So this has a little bit more movement. Make sure you get through both layers. And then it won't like bunch up so much. You're going to do that for the lining and for your main fabric. So that's the lining. Here's the main fabric. We're just slipping into that corner and do this one. Okay, now we're going to move back down to the floor so you can see a little bit better. A couple steps we're going to do right here on the floor. Just tends to make it a little bit easier to see. So to make it a robe, right now you can't wear it. To make it a robe, what we're going to do is cut up the center of the material, just one layer of the black and one layer of the red, and that's going to make it into the robe. So there's already, on my material, there's already kind of a line up the center from where the material was folded, and the way that I put it on the material made it centered. So I'm just going to use that line, but you could definitely use a piece of chalk and make it super even and all of that fun stuff. But we're just going to kind of cheat and use the line that's already there. And I literally am just taking my scissors and coming up all the way to the end. So I've sliced one layer all the way to the fold at the top. All right, so the black has been cut. Now we're going to do the red. Same thing with the maroon versus red. We'll call it maroon. I just keep calling it red. But there's a line down the middle there. So we're just going to take our scissors, cut up that line all the way to the top, just like that. Now we're going to put the two layers together. Now to do that, I need to turn the black material right side out, like this. And then I'm tucking it into the maroon material. So I want to match the line I just made. And then I'm tucking my sleeve in on this side. And I'm tucking my sleeve in on this side. And then I can kind of shake it out a little. Try and match everything the best that I can. And then lay it flat again. Again, it's not about necessarily perfection, but just getting it as close as you can together. And we'll make this a little bit more perfect before we put our hood on here in just a few minutes, as that will help line everything up. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like currently. We've put our main fabric inside our lining here, right size together. Now we got to add our hood. And the hood can be a little bit tricky for people, so hopefully this will help. Now, your hood is two pieces, right? We've sewn two of each piece together, so there's a center seam. You have a center seam right here where we've cut. This is your center back. This is the back of your neck. So we're going to line the raw edge of the hood to the raw edge center of the robe. Okay, to do that, we have to flip it this way. Now, we talked about there being a V here. This V is going to match up with this V. But we actually have to put it on the inside for all of the seams to be hidden. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to take the black layer where our center seam is, and we're just going to kind of pull it out just a little bit. We know where the center is right here. Here's the center back here. We're going to line up the center back of our hood, black on black here. We're going to tuck it kind of inside. And then same thing, the center of our maroon edge of our hood to the center of back of our maroon robe. So all the centers are matched right here in the middle. Okay, so we have our main robe, our lining robe, our hood inside. Hey, and then we just take it and we take each side of our hood and we're just lining the robe and the hood together. See how we do that? Robe, hood, robe. Lining those raw edges together. Robe, hood, robe. And we'll do one more right here at the end, making sure we get our whole hood in there like that. So that's one side. Now we're going to do the other side. So we have our hood here. So robe, hood, robe. Layers together. Robe, hood, we have to straighten it up. Robe, all together. And don't be afraid to move things around. We can always straighten it out later as long as these layers are all getting together. All right, that's the end of that part of the hood. So let's kind of straighten it out a little here so you can see. It looks a little wonky because the hood's on the inside, but you can see that V that we cut, right? So now to sew, we are literally going to sew all the way across. I'm going to start here, kind of like on our hood. We started on the edge of one side and sewed all the way across and down. And then we started on the opposite edge and sewed all the way across and down. We're going to do the same thing on this because what ends up happening is things will shift and then you'll have like a bunch of fabric and then there's like a tuck or a pleat or pucker, and we don't want that. So we'll start up here and stitch and then here and stitch down. And this is going to stitch our hood to our robe and also stitch close the front of the robe. Need to stitch. Here's that V, our hood's in there. So I'm going to start on this, kind of by this red pin, and I'm going to stitch all the way down this lining. So I'm going to kind of flip everything so I can get my robe in. And I'm going to stitch it about 1/4 inch this time. Forward and back stitch. Now this part is the tricky part because you don't want a lot of pleats and puckers. So you have to kind of watch as you go through and move your fabric so that you don't have all these weird tucks and pleats. You can't prevent them all, but you do your best. And then we just stitch all the way across that hood. We know where the hood is because we put pins in. And we pull them out as we go. And once we get to the end, now I'm just matching raw edges of my maroon and my black. Stitching all the way to the end. in. Cut my threads. You can kind of see how that looks. Looks pretty good. Okay, now we're gonna do to the opposite side. So I'm actually going to turn this so the black side is up this time. And I'll start just before where my stitches ended. Stitch over some of those. It's just a good way to reinforce. This is kind of what it looks like. Now we're gonna go back down to the floor and turn it right side out and go from there. All right, here is our sewn robe. So we've sewn the two front panels together. So now we're gonna turn it right side out. So we're literally just gonna open it up and flip it around. It does take a little bit of work because the sleeves never turn right. So I take a sleeve, go inside and search of the maroon sleeve, bring it out, take this black sleeve, go inside, search for the maroon sleeve, and pull that out. All right. Starting to look like a robe, isn't it? On this side. And there we go. So, here is what we just have sewn. Right, we have the V, and we got the hood in there. So here's our hood, nice big hood. Okay, there is pretty much our finished robe. Now the last things we have to do is hem the sleeves, hem the base, hem the hem, I guess you would say, and then we need to put on our buttons on either side. That'll be the closure that'll hold this robe closed while still showing what's underneath. So that's one of the things I like about this pattern, is that there's just this little loop that will hold it closed, and then you can, if you're wearing a specific outfit underneath that's Harry Potter themed, people can still see it. While we were gone, I went ahead and pressed these front seams here, so you didn't have to watch and be bored by it, but you do want those nice and pressed. If you want, you have the option to top stitch them. I'm not going to, because again, we talked about this I think earlier, I like it flowy, and that top stitching kind of makes it a little bit stiff. All right, the next step is we are going to hem our sleeves. So to do this, we're going to kind of pull out the maroon section of our sleeve, and we are going to press it by turning it 1/4 of an inch to the wrong side. 1/4 of an inch, I guess, to 1/2 inch. Turn it, and then we'll just lay it down here and press it. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing to the black layer, only this one's going to be pressed towards the inside, about 1/4 of an inch. So what we're doing is hiding those raw edges on the inside. I have tried for years to figure out how to do it so that you don't have to stitch it like this, but I haven't found a way yet. So this is the way we have. So now we've got our 2 layers. We're going to line up the seam. Just put a pin there. Just kind of straighten it out. And we're going to stitch around the sleeve so that all the layers, all 2 of them, makes it sound like there's 40 layers, but so that both layers stay together where we press them. All right, it's kind of what it looks like. So we're gonna take it and put it on our machine. We're gonna start at the beginning here where we have our seam. Start where the seam is. Pull that pin out here to start. And then I'm going to try and stitch as close to that edge as I can get it without running off. Pull my pins as I go. Okay. There we go. Stitched in there. Gotta kind of unwind it so you can see there's that sleeve. It looks nice. I just kind of prefer not to do something like this, but if you're amazing and you can figure it out, you just let me know. We're gonna do the other sleeve and then we will add our buttons. We got both our sleeves sewn, hemmed. The next step is to make our closure. So,
I'm having trouble hearing. Can you say that again?
Cancel. We have both our sleeves sewn, got our hems in. So the next step is to put on our closure on the front. So what you're going to need are 2 buttons. These 2 are just a little bit smaller than what I would normally go with. I would go up just a size bigger, but this is what I've got, so we're going to go with it. And then you're going to need about a 5-inch piece of ribbon or twine. You could go a little bit bigger, but I wouldn't. If I go bigger, I don't usually like it. Now, cut your piece of ribbon and either use a match and fray the edges, or use something like fray check on the edges to make sure that they won't continue to fray. So I put my fray check on and it's kind of drying right now. So we're going to mark where our buttons go. So the first thing we want, I like my button, so we're matching where our hood is sewn and where it ends on the front of our robe. So this is where it ends. So I'm actually going to measure about 3 inches, 2 to 3 inches down. So I have my little tape measure here. So in between 2 and 3 inches is about where I want my button. So I'm going to take just a pin and put it kind of in the middle of that 2 and 3 inches. So that's a little bit short. So about right here is where I want one. And then about right here is where I want the other. Now this is why it's important that we've pressed this front side. And again, if you want to top stitch it, you are more than welcome to, but I'm not going to do that. So this is where I want my 2 buttons. Now the first thing we're going to do is take our piece of ribbon. We're going to match the 2 ends, so we make kind of this little loop here. And we're going to place this where our first pin is, right here. And we're going to go in about 1 inch. Okay, you can put it on the right side, you can put it on the left side, it doesn't really matter. I'm just putting it on the right side. And then I'm going to put it in my machine and I'm going to stitch that ribbon down securely. I went forward and backward, and I'm going to lift, and I'm going to go to the end of those and go forward and backward. And that's just going to make it so I know that ribbon is not going to go anywhere. Play with this guy out just a little bit again here for you, so you can kind of see cut our threads here. Okay. Now, if you want to, you could sew your buttons on using your machine. I'm going to use a needle and thread to sew my buttons on. So I'm going to sew my first one on over on this side where my needle is. So I'm going to come in from the back and then come down through the opposite side. I'm going to do that about 6 times. I want this button to be secure. Now you could put a piece of interfacing on the inside before we sewed everything together. I did not do that. The interfacing would make it a little bit stronger and make it so those buttons hopefully don't pop off or go through the material, rip through. But we're all good. Okay, I think that's 6. Now I'm going to bring my needle up between my material and my button. So on the back side of my button, bring my needle up, and I'm going to make what we call a shank. And the shank is going to give it enough of a raise from the fabric that this material, this ribbon, can go around the button and stay. Like I said, I do think I need just a little bit more of a bigger of a button. But so I'm just wrapping this thread around the button about 6 to 8 times, and then I'm going to go back through. That went like way far away. I'm going to go back through kind of in the same area, and then I can tie it off so it's nice and tight. I can get my needle through again. And there's my first button. Looking pretty good. Some more thread here. Thread up my needle. Oops. I'm doing 2 layers of thread. You don't need to do that. You could do a single layer, but I think it gives it just a little bit more structure for this. Okay, so now I'm going to do my second button, and it's going to go kind of at the end of where this is. And so it's going to go through several layers of material to get into the button. So this is where it's nice if you want to use your sewing machine to try and stitch it versus hand stitching it, because sometimes when you get through too many layers it starts getting difficult. But this one isn't too bad, as long as you don't hit that fray check. That fray check can get really hard. Oops. So again, we're going to go about 6 times around. So this is number 3. Number 4. And 5. Now, why am I sewing a button on this side? Because that button actually isn't going to get used, right? I'm sewing it on there just for the look so that it's symmetrical. So one button's on one side and there's a button on the other side. So if you didn't want to do that, my heaven, there we go. You don't necessarily have to do that. Okay. Now this button's not going to be used for anything, so I'm not going to shank it. I'm just going to tie it off on the back through all these layers. It's just a decorative button, so I'm not super worried that it's going to fall off or have difficulties. Okay, there we go. Button and ribbon, loops around, and there's your closure. It's a very, very simple closure. Now, if you wanted, you could just do like a little piece of Velcro. You could do snaps. I just like it, and I said this earlier, because this allows the robe to kind of stay open, which I think is a little bit more authentic for Harry Potter. All right, last step. The last step is to hem your robe. And we're going to turn the edges in and press them. Okay, all the way around. And that's where this cute little guy comes in handy. Now, it looks like on this particular robe, my red layer is just slightly longer than the black layer, just the way it was cut, and that's fine. So we're just tucking enough of the black layer in that it doesn't show the raw edge, like this. And then just matching the red to it the best that we can. And again, it's nice if you press it, because like right now it doesn't want to do what I want. If it's pressed, it tends to listen to you a little bit more. So this probably is like the most time constraining part, because you're having to match. You know, you had to do a little bit on the sleeve, but not like you do on this. All right, so when we get to our corner, again, it's kind of weird. Let's go ahead and fold this side. And we'll fold this one to meet it. So we just kind of folded those edges together so we get that sharp point. And then we just continue down the robe. Here we go. We got our 5,000 pins in. And now what we're going to do before we sew it, just to make sure everything lines up, we're going to kind of lay it out flat on the table here, because we want to make sure that our hem isn't too crazy. Tighten up the hem, and then make sure that as you go across here, it looks fairly even, that these two are about even. So everything's looking pretty good. So I think we are ready to sew it up. We're gonna sew on the black side, because that's what we want to look the best, because that's what people are gonna see. And so we're gonna sew on the black side. So if there are puckers or tucks because of whatever, they're not on the side that everybody's gonna see. And we're just sewing along the bottom edge. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch, as I would think. 1/8 of an inch from the bottom. And just moving our pins as we go. Okay, this is one of our kind of mitered corners, so I'm just going to make sure everybody looks right here. Turn corner, and then we'll turn. Going. Awesome. All right. Let's see how we did. It looks pretty good. And that is how you make Harry Potter wizard robes. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. We'll see you next time.